Underlining is one of the most prominent study strategies that most students are using. Have you underlined any words? Were you able to remember the words after you underlined them? Now, if you are not able to do that, I want you to stick with me, stay tuned, and listen to what I have for you. Because after you have listened to whatever I have for you, you would find in your hands the strategies for you to avert the mirage or the illusions of competence whenever you face after you have underlined certain key points in the paragraph or in the passage that you just read. Underlining is one of the most prominent study strategies that most students are using. Have you underlined any words? Were you able to remember the words after you underlined them? Now, if you are not able to do that, I want you to stick with me, stay tuned, and listen to what I have for you. Because after you have listened to whatever I have for you, you would find in your hands the strategies for you to avert the mirage or the illusions of competence whenever you face after you have underlined certain key points in the paragraph or in the passage that you just read. And I, as a student, always use underlining when I'm reading or when I'm learning and studying for an exams or just to better myself. And one of the things that I've found with underlining is that there are few strokes against it, in as much as it is important for us to underline, because whenever you underline, what is that is that it creates what we call the isolation effect. It is able to pick out the words that you have underlined in the sea of words that is written in the pages for you to read. And so one of the advantages of underlining is that it helps you to isolate the words. So in going back to actually revise the paragraph or the page that you have read, it is very easier for you to notice the important points that what you have actually underlined. And that is one beneficial advantage of what underlining. It identifies the most important thing in the paragraph or in the passage that you have that you are reading, for you to easily identify them later on in life. And so underlining is very much important, and it is one of the most prominent and easy study techniques that most students are using. But upon further research, I noticed that there are few strokes against underlining, in as much as it is important for us to underline because it creates the isolation effect and help us to identify words that are very much important in the ocean of words found in a book. The strokes of underlining are that the fact that you've underlined doesn't mean that you have actually embedded what you have underlined in your mind. And this is so contrarian in the sense that as most students, as myself, I'm a student and I always learn, and I would always love to underline. I found that whenever I underline and I go further on to read the next paragraph to see what is there, whenever I want to recall something that I have underlined earlier on, it becomes very difficult for me to underline. It seems that I know what I underlined, but in actual sense, trying to remember it is very difficult for me to remember. It seems that the words that I underline are just a mirage in my mind. And when we talk about a mirage is like in science when you are walking on a road and you see a pool of water ahead of you, and the more you walk to the pool of water, the more that pool of water disappears. That is the mirage that you have been experiencing. So the more you try to dig in your mind, the more you find that the information that you underlined is not in your mind. So I have been experiencing this a lot, and I believe that most students who are experiencing this, in that they will try to underline all the very salient, important things in the paragraph or in the passage that they are reading, in hope that the underlined words will stick in their mind, or it become very easier for them to identify, which is one of the good strokes against what underlining. But in as much as it is important for us to underline, it does not necessarily encode the material that you have underlined in our mind. This is so contrarian, because when I found that, I was like, oh yes, Now I understand why whenever I underline and I try to remember what I have underlined, it becomes very difficult for me to remember, because it seems like a mirage. And this researchers have pinpointed that these are called the illusions of competence whenever we are reading or whenever we are learning. They are the illusions of competence when learning. And this is because the fact that you have underlined a certain word does not necessarily mean that you have encoded the underlying material in your mind. So, and another illusion that comes to us as students is that the mere fact that we are moving our hands and our marker or the pencil or the pen or the highlighter, whatever we are using to highlight or underline, is moving across the salient points that we want to underline. We think that the mere action of that is helping our mind to encode the material in our memory, which is very, 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 very so wrong. Because if you have underlined, you would notice that trying to remember the very underlined words, it becomes very hectic and become very difficult to actually remember the very thing that you've underlined minutes ago or even seconds ago, because we didn't take our time to encode the information. And because it is so simple for us to underline and it doesn't require much energy, much effort for us to underline the words or the salient points, we think that the easiness of the study strategy correlates to us encoding the material in our memory, which is so contrarian to what researchers have been able to put out. So one of the things that you can do to avert this illusion of competence when underlining is that whenever you underline, take your time as much as possible to try to encode the material in your memory. So after you have underlined the words or the salient points that you want to underline, take your time to actively engage with the underlined words. As this instant, it will become so isolated to you. So in order for you to prevent the mirage happening when you are trying to remember, after underlining, try as much as possible to actively engage with the material or actively engage with the underlined words. And as you're actively engaging with the material, what I mean by that is that you ask yourself questions and you teach yourself. So researchers or psychologists call this the prodigy effect. In as much that you have underlined the material, actively engaging the material would cause you to better understand the material and give you better retention when you want to further remember the underlying words in the long run. So actively engaging with the material is very much important. So after you have identified the salient points or the salient sentences in the paragraph that you have recently read, for you to actually remember and encode the information, so that later on when you are trying to recall, it will not become like a mirage in your head. You have to actively engage with the material and actively encode the material in your memory. That is the only way that underlining will be profitable to you, because the fact that you are underlining doesn't necessarily mean that you have the underlying words in your mind. This is the illusion that most of us have found ourselves in, and it is causing us a lot, because we think that underlining is the same as learning, or underlining is the same as reading and encoding the material, which is so wrong. So for you to encode the material, after identify the salient points and underlining it, actively engage with the material by asking questions to really understand and probe the underlying words, to actually understand whatever you have underlined. Teach yourself whatever you have underlined, and by doing that, you are actively encoding the material in your memory. This is one of the ways that you can avert the illusions of competence. So underlining does not guarantee encoding the information in your memory. What guarantees the encoding of the information or the underlying words in your memory is the fact that you actively engage with the underlying words and you actively encode the material in your memory. That is the only way that you can avert the illusions of competence and you will prevent the mirage that you experience whenever you are trying to recall the underlined words. So this is what I wanted to share with you. So if you find this valuable, kindly hit the subscribe button and kindly share it to your friends too as well.